All right. You may begin.
Okay, so a brief recap of what I went over yesterday. Leopold was socially awkward and no one liked him, but he was really smart, and so he would always say that he was better than other people because he was smart, because he was lacking in other categories, like how to talk to people. He was also a law major, which is important for when we look at his letters. Loeb, he was also super smart, but not as smart, and he was attractive and people liked him, but he had a life of crime and would just do petty theft all the time and convince his friends to join along with him. So they don't meet until a little while afterwards, and oh my mouse is what can I say?
There we go.
So they meet and they see each other every single day for years. And they were best friends. I couldn't find anything that actually said they were dating, but they were dating. When you see their letters, and Leopold's obsession with Loeb, they very much were dating. And of course, it's the 1920s, so they're not going to be like super open about that. But there was the psychological power dynamic between them. Like I said, Leopold was much more focused on I'm smarter than you, therefore I'm better than you, and what I say is law because I'm smart. And then since he's also deeply infatuated with Loeb, Loeb uses this to make Leopold commit crimes with him. So not a very good dynamic between the two. It's just kind of doomed for something bad to happen. Both were fans of Nietzsche and specifically the Superman, which is basically a person that exists beyond conventional morality. And this is kind of like what they were striving for. Specifically, Leopold, he was much more like, this is going to be me. And so they convinced themselves that because they are so much smarter and better than other people, that they are like absolved of the consequences of their actions. And they're also thinking, hey, since we're so much smarter than everybody else, we can just get away with stuff. And they'll have no clue that we even did it in the first place. This is kind of where the perfect crime comes about, because that's when they start scheming for actually doing the crime they're about to commit. Oh, here's my favorite paragraph ever. So, context for this. The day before, Loeb had just left Leopold's house, and they got into sort of an argument. And so Leopold sent him this first letter talking about how he needed Loeb to respond because Leopold did something wrong, but Leopold wasn't going to apologize for his actions at all. And so Loeb responded with this letter, and this is Leopold's response to Loeb's letter in the second paragraph. So I'm going to read it out because it brings me so much joy. But I fear, Dick, that your letter has failed to settle this controversy itself, as 2 points are still left open. These I will now attack. I just want to remind you that this is like a love letter to his boyfriend. As I wrote you yesterday, the decision of our relation was in your hands because it depended entirely on how you wished to treat my refusal to admit that I acted wrongly. This request you did not answer. You imply merely that because of my statement that I regret the whole matter, I am in part at least admitting what you desire. I thought twice before putting that phrase in my letter for fear you might misconstrue it, as you would have in fact done. I just need you to see how sassy and kind of so rude he is. But this is just my favorite thing ever. This old-timey law speak love letter from an insane man. But yeah.
That'll be on the test. You have to.
Yes, you have to know every word of that.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. But I fear that's the first one. So you need the crime, the specifics of it. So what happened? So like I said before, they chose their victim, Bobby Franks, who was a neighbor of theirs. This was Loeb's distant cousin. They never actually met, but Frank's father and Loeb's father did talk. So Franks, he played tennis and he was walking home from tennis practice and he's about 2 or 3 blocks away from his house at the time. And then Loeb and Leopold are in a rented car. It was rented that day under a different name. I don't remember the name of that though. But they're in this rented car and they pull up beside him. And then eventually they somehow convince Bobby Franks to get in the car, even though he's like 2 blocks away from his house. So Bobby gets in. Whoever's in the backseat, they don't know who was and who was driving. They hit him with the blunt end of a chisel, and so he's like discombobulated and let go. And they gag him and drag him into the backseat. And then they start driving. They drive to a culvert in Indiana where Bobby is dead on the time of arrival because he suffocated because he fell asleep and just kind of couldn't breathe. So they bring him to this culvert. They kind of really mess up with his body because they pour hydrochloric acid all over it and then shove it in a culvert. And they're like thinking to themselves, peak crime. No one is going to understand how we got through with this. And so they leave his body and they drive back home, where they then write ransom notes to Frank's father under the name George Johnson.
Ready? Yeah, next time just wait at the door and we'll get you, okay? Did I just not see him?
Yeah,
because I was,
My stupid computer screams him.
So they drive back home, and they write this ransom note on a portable typewriter, and they send it to Frank's father. And they're like, "Give us $10,000, and we'll give you your son back." Even though I need to mention again, they're both already rich. Their families are very well off, and they are most likely going to get all this wealth when their parents have died. But they're like, "We need $10,000 from you, Mr. Franks." And so Franks gets this letter, but he doesn't respond instantly. And then the next day, the police find Bobby's body, and they also find a pair of glasses next to it. And then they also find this burned typewriter, which you may think is perhaps a typewriter they used and then set on fire so no one would find it. But yes, those are the glasses. So they got caught almost instantly after they killed him. They found the glasses that were there were Leopold's not sunglasses, just glasses. They had a rare hinge that only like 12 people in Chicago had at the time. And so they're like, okay, so this is one of 12 people. And then they looked at the prescription for the glasses and like, okay, so it's one guy who left his glasses at the crime scene. And they found out it was Leo. So they were quickly brought in and interrogated, and they both instantly crumbled under this pressure and strain. They didn't have good alibis because they're only with each other, and so their alibis were really inconsistent about where they were at the time. And they confessed pretty much instantly. This was really shocking for a lot of people because, like, why did these promising, wealthy young men go and murder a child for intellectual amusement? Why was that what happened? But then, of course, they brought the court. And so their defense attorney, Clarence Darrow, he was, kind of the best lawyer at the trial. Most famous attorney at the time. He was very opposed to the death penalty, and he had the landmark role of playing in the Scopes Monkey trial, if you guys remember that. But since he was so against the death penalty, he fought extremely hard to get these boys off the hook for the murder they committed. So he spoke for 12 straight hours about why they shouldn't be killed. He kind of sympathized with the judges' humanity, emphasizing like their youth and their psychological immaturity and the damaging effects of their upbringings, most specifically Leopold's, because he did not have a good relationship with his father. But one point that it goes back to the love letters, the prosecution brought up the fact of these love letters and were hinting that they had a homoerotic relationship, and that at the time was seen as crazy. And so Darrow says, if this makes them crazy, then you can't give them the death penalty because then they can plead insanity. So I think they should back off from that point, and they did. That was the only time in the trial that the love letters were mentioned, and I just think that's beautiful. But in the end, they didn't get the death penalty, but instead got life imprisonment plus 99 years. So that's not great, but it's good that they were. So after this, there's their mugshots. What came after? Loeb was killed shortly after in prison in 1936 due to a razor blade attack from another inmate and died from over 50 razor blade wounds. One of his last letters to Leopold was for Leopold's birthday. I wrote it down. Happiest birthday to you. I'm wishing you many happy returns and pleasures without end, because I'm glad you were born and proud to be your friend. So that's a little poem. But that's what happened to Leopold. Oh no, Loeb. Leopold, however, served over 30 years and was eventually paroled in 1958. He then moved to Puerto Rico and died in 1971. He lived a pretty quiet life after the whole thing. But it has inspired many books, films, plays, including Rope by Hitchcock.
Good movie.
I haven't seen the movie, but it continues to symbolize this sort of privilege and ego and moral corruption that people tend to bring when they think of themselves as better than others because of one specific attribute. It's one of the most famous criminal cases in the U.S. It's still studied for criminology, law, and sociology, mainly for the fact that it's really interesting to see that these two boys who had pretty good lives in comparison thought that it'd be a great idea to just do this just for their own amusement and see, and to show how much better they were than other people. What do I think? So, what do I think of them as people? I think they're not good people, but they're really interesting people to study and look at, because Leopold had so much going on in his life, and he's such a complex person. He's kind of like the stereotypical quiet kid in class when you really look at him and go through his life. Loeb is more sort of this popular smart guy that everyone just kind of enjoys, but is just mean. The crime, I think it's absolutely horrible, but I do think it's funny that they thought they could get away with it while also leaving your glasses at the crime scene, and then sending a ransom note that made no sense, and then renting a car, and then returning it instantly after, and then putting this boy's body in a culvert. Who the boy was well known, and his family liked him, and so they're like, why is he not back from practice yet? So I think they picked the wrong victim for their perfect crime. The trial, I was honestly really impressed with how Darrow got through without them getting the death penalty, because that was just kind of the thing you got if you killed someone. So it was really impressive to see how he burned his way out of it. I read partway through his 12-hour speech, and it was quite convincing. So I understand how the judge was like, okay, I see it, I get it. And what came from it, I think it's a really interesting thing to study, and also just seeing how people react to it, because you always imagine that people who commit crimes are people who have had horrible lives, or there's something that just isn't right with them. But then when you look at these two people, it's interesting to see how they were just normal, well-off people, and how they still could do horrible actions. But yeah, that's my. No, I don't put my research in.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Oh,
You
yes.
think Leopold would have done it without Loeb?
No, I don't think either of them would have done it without the other, because they fed off each other's sort of mental play the entire time. Because Leopold didn't have the confidence to go through with anything and more just stuck to the sidelines, while Loeb probably wasn't smart enough to get away with thinking of this plan he was more into like petty theft and just kind of like he junked people sometimes, but he didn't do anything like super big. But no, they couldn't have done it without each other, and they did it wrong, which is why I think their little letters are so beautiful.
Leopold could have done it just.
Oh yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, this was a big cake. This is huge. Rope is a good movie. Yeah. All right, good job. Thank you. Well, let's think of the same era, because I think we need a little bit of financial shenanigans. Nope, we're doing Ponzi first. Then we'll get that.
I heard now financial.
There you have excited.
I got it.
We're gonna do Sydney first because she's gonna be skipping tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's what they said too. They all wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Doesn't do.
Oh, your phone.
Give me one sec. And we have, by the way, these are great. These are fun. We're learning how to do the perfect crime now, right? We can do it. Yeah. We're filming this. We would never do that.
Yeah, we would have glasses.
Or a wallet or ID.
Alright.
Then Roman give it.
Mouse is there. Okay, good.
Okay. So I did Charles Ponzi and Ponzi schemes in general. And so the era of the time, it was in the early 1900s. It was he committed it in 1919 and was arrested on August 12th, 1920. And so this was in the post-World War I era. And again, with kind of what June was talking about with Sacco and Vanzetti, where there was just a very heavy anti-immigrant mindset, and nativism was very much so a thing and very aggressive in this time period. And this was seen through some of the legislation that was passed in the time. So like the Immigration Act of 1917 had just passed before doing it, meaning that most immigrants were required to take a literacy test upon entering the United States. And again, it just intensified this attitude. And then again, shortly after the crime was committed, the National Origins Act of 1924 was soon to pass, which is very big and still talked about. And this set a quota system for immigrants. And even the immigrants who had already made it into the United States prior to this became alienated, and there were many hate crimes and they were discriminated against. And in the post-war era, another thing that kind of is what Ponzi built his scheme upon is in the post-war era, inflation in Southern Europe, there was, it was very high. And so things were cheaper there and could be exchanged in the United States. And so this is seen through his scheme where he uses international reply coupon, which I will talk about later. Okay. So to start, what is a Ponzi scheme? The base idea is called rob Peter to pay Paul. So essentially, it is a form of investment fraud that promises high returns, and after a while, these high returns can't be sustained. And so the solution is paying new investors or paying old investors with the money from new investors. And so it's just the cycle, and it creates this illusion of big profit when in reality, oftentimes it ends in people being bankrupt. And again, it grows too fast. People get excited. They hear that this high return thing and they're like, oh, I got to invest all my money. And then they lose their money. And then the person who ends up committing the crime loses their money. So it's a lose-lose situation after it gets so far. And so before the scheme, he was an Italian immigrant, and Ponzi came to the United States in 1903 with very little money. And one of his quotes that he said later in life, he said, I landed in this country with $2.50 in cash and $1 million in hopes. And those hopes never left me. Well, those hopes led him to commit the fraud that he is now named after. And so then after doing odd jobs in the United States, he then moved to Montreal in 1907 and began working at a bank called Bank Zarossi.
And this bank had extremely high interest rates and they made very poor business decisions. And so they went out of business. And Ponzi again lost all of his money and so didn't know what to do. And so he forged a check to himself so he could get money and then got caught. And so when he got caught, additionally, he was confronted by police officers and he held out his hands and just like held it out in front of him. He goes, "I'm guilty," and just immediately confessed. And then he went to prison in Canada for 3 years. And then after being released from prison, he came back to America and then immediately started smuggling Italian immigrants across the border and went to prison, got caught again, and went to 2 years in Atlanta prison. And then, upon being released from prison for a second time, he moved to Boston and started the scheme that he is now well known for. And so, what did he actually do? And so, again, it began in 1919. It was based on something called International Reply Coupons, which technically still exists today, but nobody really uses them because we don't send letters anymore very often. And so basically what it is when sending a letter to someone in another country, you could include a international reply coupon, which could be exchanged for stamps in the responder's country. And so what this means is that if you bought a coupon in, say, Italy, which is where he bought it, and then exchanged it for stamps in the United States, you would get more money from those stamps than you paid for the original coupon. And this circle was legal, essentially. It was perfectly legal. And the problem is when he started promising these returns, he started with this scheme, he started making a 400% profit with exchanging these international reply coupons. And then he wanted to grow this. He said, "Oh, well, I can make people pay me money to do this scheme." And so he started doing it on a larger scale. And this is when the actual crime begins. So he promised that investors would receive 50% returns in 45 days and 100% returns in 90 days, both of which were very not possible and outrageous. And so the way he could fulfill these claims is by doing the scheme, the Ponzi scheme, and pay old investors with the money of new ones. And this just kept growing, and he became increasingly richer and richer. And reports say that in the prime of his scheme, he was making up to $250,000 a day. And so with these high returns, people began to get suspicious, and the Boston Post ran an investigation and discovered that he was committing illegal activities. And so then he was arrested on August 12th, 1920, and charged with 86 counts of mail fraud, still owing $7 million. And after this, he was spent 14 years in prison. And then again, so then he got out of prison and he's like, "Oh, you know what I need to do? Do it again." And so he immediately moves to Florida and starts a new illegitimate business which he called Charpon, which if you think about it, is just his name. It's the first part of his first name, Char, and then the second part or the first part of his second name, Pawn. And he just combined it and was like, "Yeah." And so in doing this, he promised small tracts of land in Florida, and he sold this and promised a 200% profit in a very short amount of time. He sold swampland, not real land. And so after selling this swampland, he got caught again and went to prison. And then after being released, he got deported back to Italy. And it is said that Mussolini even didn't want him back. So there were arguments as to who would have to keep Ponzi. So there was a court case because he didn't want to get deported. And then there were arguments between Mussolini and the United States about who was going to take him. And so after this, he did finally get sent back to Italy. His wife divorced him, not wanting to move. And then he went into extreme poverty and spent the rest of his life working small jobs until dying in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro. And then a quote from him right before he died is like on his deathbed. One of the last things he said to an interviewer, he said, "I have given them the best show that was staged in their territory since the landing of the Pilgrims. It was easily worth 15 million bucks to watch me put the thing over." So that kind of gives you an idea of who he was as a person and how he viewed what he did. And so again, the legacy. And so the entire scheme is now named after him. He wasn't the first one to do this, but he continued to be mentioned, and he's still very well known today as this guy who committed this scheme, and now it is a Ponzi scheme because of him. And people called it the fraud of the century. Again, not to be confused with Rowan's, who's the crime of the century.
Oh,
So different things. And it led to reform of financial systems, and it set a baseline for punishment for white collar crime in the United States. And it just represents a cautionary tale of greed and craving for money once it's achieved. And he was not able to stop this scheme because he just kept receiving more money from it. And so he's like, oh, I can keep going. And he got caught. And so then again, with the legacy, there's a lot of other people who committed Ponzi schemes. So the first Ponzi scheme was actually in Germany by someone named Adele Spitzhelder. And she ran one of the very first Ponzi schemes in recorded history. And she was originally an actress who failed and then moved to Munich with her girlfriend and her 6 dogs. And then she opened a bank in 1869 and began operating a Ponzi scheme. She was caught because people loved her bank so much that they took their money out of other banks and invested it into hers. And then the people running those banks were like, no, they can't do that. That's illegal. She's a woman, and so we need to investigate it. And it turns out she was doing things that were illegal.
you're a woman.
Oh, yeah. And so she ended up scamming over 32,000 customers for 38 million golden, which is 464 million US dollars today. And when she did this, there was no precedent for criminal charges for Ponzi schemes because there was no recorded history of someone doing it. And so she only got sentenced to 3 years and 10 months in prison. And then got out and again opened another fraud. She did it again. And this is a common thing that you'll see with people doing Ponzi schemes. And then the largest is Bernie Madoff, which was in the early 2000s, and he scammed people of $65 billion. And he was really good. And the only reason that he got caught is because of the financial crisis of 2008, when people began to withdraw money very fast, and he became scared. And so he told his sons, who reported him, and so that's how he got caught. And then the last one is the person who is why I did the presentation in the first place, who is my dad's childhood friend. And so this guy, his name is, I couldn't find any pictures of him. I spent like an hour looking for a single picture of this man, and I couldn't find anything, but his name is Kenneth Case Tebbs, and as he was known by most people is Casey Tebbs. And so he was my dad's childhood friend, and he opened up 2 investment companies, Twin Peaks Financial and MNK Investments, both focused on investments in new land developments in 2000 in Utah. And so he promised an 18% return rate and ran them both legitimately until 2006. And then it began to transform into a Ponzi scheme, and it just continued to spiral out and out of his control more and more. And so he continued his facade of confidence for like 3 years until he had no money and had to declare bankruptcy. And then this was all uncovered. And there's recorded evidence of him reassuring investors less than 2 weeks before he declared bankruptcy. And so he sat on a couch and like looked someone in the eyes and said, your money is going to a good place. And then declared bankruptcy 2 weeks later. And so this Ponzi scheme was worth $49 million, and an estimated $17 million was lost. And he was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison in 2014 and was released recently in like 2020.
So starting an investment firm as we speak. Yeah.
Yes, so now we just have to wait for him to start a new fraud like everybody else. Everybody wants to know. Yeah, class investment, I think it would work. I think we know what to invest in.
I think we should take bets.
Yeah, I think we should.
I
Yeah,
recommend it too.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, very good.
It's gambling and crime all in one. And so again, with just the repeat offenders where people get out of jail and they're like, I can get more money too. And they do the exact same thing, thinking that they won't get caught a second time. Just it keeps happening with almost every single person. And they almost always end badly because people get so greedy that they're like, I can keep going. And then as they keep going, something happens and they lose all of it. And so, yes, that is my evaluation. And there's a platypi.
Wow, very good. And that's good. I'm glad you had the physical connection. Any questions? Any questions? Are we gonna start a Ponzi scheme?
Yes.
Absolutely. Very good.
If you were to run a Ponzi scheme, what would it be? Oh, if I was to run a Ponzi.
Now that
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know how to think about it.
It's on camera too.
I think we need to do investments. I like Rain's idea. I like the idea the class came up with. We run investments on other people's gambling, and we decide when they're gonna win. And they give me money, and then when they win, I give them money. But since gambling is a cycle, I'm paying you with.
Smart.
This is all,
Yeah,
wow.
I thought about it.
Who's writing this down?
Hold on, ready? I'm gonna get caught.
Then we'll block it. I'll say one thing. This friend of my wife's went to high school, kind of acquaintance friend. Trying to get her into one. They said, well, and she was immediately suspicious, but it was called Women Helping Women. And they specifically, the Justice Department said, that was illegal. And it was just such a nice thing. Women would join and they would pay a fee. And then if you got other women to join, you would get a fee. Then if you're getting money, you had to get other women to join. And you get the point here? So it's called a Ponzi scheme, or you might have heard of a Ponzi scheme as a form of a pyramid scheme.
What's the difference?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can do this, we gotta know our definition.
Yeah.
Okay, who else is gonna be gone tomorrow besides Sid?
Yeah.
Fiona, is it-
Oh, you're,
Dave, you wanna go?
Sure.
You're beginning them all. You're number one.
All right.
Or you have to go? Huh? Yep. Pete?
Oh, it didn't update. That picture got moved. That's unfortunate. I can resubmit it to you because I put that picture up there.
Yeah. Whoa.
So I basically get half the credit for your. Give me one sec. Okay,
All right, so my presentation is on the Unabomber, the life and the crimes of Ted Kaczynski. And in this presentation, I will be going through his life too, because it's important to realize who he was and everything. All right, so Theodore Kaczynski, or the Unabomber, bailed bombs across the country, killing 3 people, injuring many more. He believed the industrialization of society was destroying personal freedoms and used terror to discredit ideas. He lived in Lincoln, Montana for the duration of his crimes. So he was born in Chicago in 1942. He was labeled genius throughout his childhood. He skipped grades 6 and 11. And this, he said later in an interview, caused him to suffer socially because he was seen as smart, but also very young and immature, and people bullied him. He got a Harvard scholarship at 16 years old. And later his IQ was tested at 162. So this guy is really smart. And that is him right there in his math club. All right, so College of Mathematics. He went to Harvard where he studied mathematics. He wanted to be a mathematician. He was part of a psychological study and this psychological study was really important, where basically this professor said, you guys are going to mail, like different students in the city are going to mail these essays back and forth discussing philosophy. And it was supposed to be like a nice argumentative thing, but quickly it was reported that his essays were really mean, really bullying, just kind of like ridiculing his opponent in crazy ways. And later in the defense of him during his trial, they used this as proof to say he was insane. He went to the University of Michigan later, where he also studied mathematics. He wrote a lot of proofs that are really crazy. Like he was really smart. So check those out if you want to look up the proofs of Ted Kaczynski. And then he also said that he passed all of his class at University of Michigan with A's except for one physics class. And he said that he hated it there because they had low standards of grading and he should have failed all of his classes. And then after some decision making, he became a teacher at Berkeley. All right, so these are his crimes that he committed from 1978 to 1995. These are the bombings. There's a lot. So 3 people are killed: Hugh Scruton, Thomas Mosser, and Gilbert Brent Murray. And then these are the list of where the bombings were and then the injuries. So another notable one is American Airlines Flight 444, which is 12 passengers were injured from smoke inhalation. And
I won't make you know all the bombing. I mean, that won't be on the test.
yeah.
Just that, from 78 to 95 bombing, and we'll get this.
All right. So before I talk about his manifesto, I learned after I made this presentation and sent it in an interesting fact about him, which is that once he moved to Lincoln, Montana, it's where he said the only place he's ever felt truly happy. And that he was walking across his favorite meadow one day, and there was a deep road that had just been cut into it. And he said that was a turning point in his life. And that is part of what influenced him to start his terror bombings. So he wrote the Manifesto of Industrial Society and its Future. He sent that into the FBI and said, if you publish this in newspapers, I will stop the bombings. Later, that was proved to be a lie. The manifesto is anti-everything except nature. So it's anti-leftist, anti-fascist, and very against the industrialization of society, excuse me. And then this is a quote from the book, The Industrial Revolution and Its Consequences Have Been a Disaster from the Human Race. And then if you want, I do have a copy of his manifesto with me if you want me to read some excerpts.
Okay, yeah, so.
It was $1 at the bin store, which is a very strange place.
At the what store?
The bin store.
Oh, really?
It's that ugly building.
Yeah.
There's a couple, so a lot of it, especially at the beginning, he talks about how much he hated, like what we would now call a woke movement. He hated that, and there's several paragraphs against it. There was so he talks also in here about how, I'm trying to find the paragraph. He says, when people are protesting, they're not the ones who are impoverished. They're not the ones who are actually feeling these challenges. It's the rich, I think he even says, the rich people sitting in their offices. It's very well written. All right. So here's in his section, Feelings of Inferiority. There are those who are most sensitive about the politically correct terminology are not the average Black ghetto dweller, Asian immigrant, abused woman, or disabled person, but a minority of activists, many of whom do not belong to any oppressed group, but come from the privileged strata of society. Political correctness has its stronghold among university professors, which is on his list of crimes. He sent many volunteer university professors, who have secure employment with comfortable salaries, the majority of whom are heterosexual white males from middle to upper class families. So, I mean, like, well written, but strange takes on things. And then he talks about how industrialization is basically stripping us of our freedoms and we need to go back to the natural world. Very interesting read. There's a lot of PDFs of it online. He has published other books when he was in prison, so you should read more excerpts. All right, So once he submitted his manifesto, the FBI got thousands of tips from all over the country who they thought it could be. All these people came in, and one that stuck out was David Kaczynski. Said, "Yeah, that's the crazy ramblings of my brother." Ted. And then the FBI raided his home on April 3rd, 1995. That's his cabin, and that's what it looked like. He was brought to Helena for his trial. He wanted to represent himself because they were going to say he was crazy, but he didn't want that. He was put in prison for life for multiple accounts of murder and terrorism, and he committed suicide on June 10th, 2023 in his prison cell in Colorado. That was on my birthday. Legacy. So he was a famed anarchist. A lot of anarchists kind of like hailed to him and said, like, yeah, this is the guy, we support Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski hated anarchy. He didn't like that, like, kind of, he didn't like anarchy or the implications of it. So what I think is, it seems like a result of he was really smart, but he was a rough upbringing, and then he likely had schizophrenia. He, throughout his life, said he didn't, but most likely he did. And then he had severe anger issues. And it's also a tragedy on many levels, not just because of his horrible atrocities and bombings and fear that he spread all over the country, but also he was a bright young mathematician and he could have done great things. And he was also very out of touch with reality, which is shown by him living in Lincoln, Montana, and thinking he knows the secrets of life. Now, I do have a couple other interesting tidbits about him. One is that sometime when he was in college, he said he had violent fantasies about being a woman, so strong that he went to talk to a psychologist about getting a sex change operation. And this was in the 70s, so that was a different time. And he, in the waiting room, he decided against it. And he went into the psychologist's office, ranted about a bunch of other things. And then later in an interview said, and that it was a pivotal turning point in his life. And he said something clicked that made him just completely angry and bitter. He wanted to kill the psychologist. He wanted to kill everybody. He hated everybody in the room, and he said, I really wanted to just kill everybody around me. So likely he had schizophrenia or something was wrong. And he's also a very famous example of a domestic terrorist. That's it.
How many bombings were there?
There were 23.
And
There were 17 bombings, but a few of them were like multiple bombs or multiple people were injured.
oh, okay. How many people died?
3 people died. When they raided his capital, they said, I'm going to stop the bombings. They found another bomb ready to mail, and they found a lot of manuscripts for his manifesto, a lot of paperwork, or like papers for new manifestos, and the equipment to build, I believe, 10 more bombs. And his attacks were getting deadlier and deadlier as the list. It was getting worse. I heard somebody say everybody's got a story about him. I have heard at least 3 people say they've seen him or they served him coffee somewhere. And it's interesting that he was caught in Lincoln. He came into Helena quite often during his bombings, and he was brought to Helena for his raid.
There's a lot. I've had people who do the Unabomber and their parents. Yeah, so yeah, same kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Any questions? All right, good job. Okay. Well, we'll start writing beginning period with, you ready to go for beginning period tomorrow?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good job, everybody. I will record these tomorrow. Same deal, take questions. These have all been great. Really good presentation. Alicia, you're after that? Perfect.
I'm excited.
Yeah, these are awesome. They're fun.
Let me tell you, Patrick, it has 3 pictures of Obi-Wan Kenobi that are fully related to the presentation.
They better be.
They are fully related. Fully related.
Let me make sure I have you. Have you sent me? Have you sent your,
Ugly, you want me to check?
Like where?
have you sent it on tweet? Let me check to make sure I have it, but I,